Hello again, let's look at the um, short-run aggregate supply curve and the shifts and effects of the changes in the short-run aggregate supply curve. By understanding how aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves shift, you can see how real-world events like financial crises or policy changes affect the economy's equilibrium. So, use this framework to analyze other scenarios and deepen your understanding of economic fluctuations. The aggregate supply curve represents how much goods and services businesses are willing and able to produce at various price levels. When certain events occur, the short-run aggregate supply, um, the short-run aggregate supply curve can shift and leading to significant changes in the economy. Let's explore what happens when the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts and how it actually impacts the equilibrium, the output, the prices, and the unemployment using an example. Okay, looking at the changes in the oil prices. Let's assume an increase in the oil prices in this example, and we are going to follow the same four steps that we earlier discussed. An increase in oil prices raises production costs for many businesses, and here is how it affects the economy. First step, as the higher costs mean that the production of the firms are going to be affected, it is going to affect on the short-term aggregate supply. In the second step, is it going to be shifting to the right or left? So the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left because the firms are decreasing their supply, their production. This is because businesses produce less at the same price level when their costs rises. As the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts left, the economy moves from point A to point B, okay? At any given price, all of the points on short-run aggregate supply are shifting to the left, and the new equilibrium point where the short-run aggregate supply and the aggregate demand intersect is will be at point B. Okay, a new short-run equilibrium. At point B, comparing it with the point A, you see that the level of the prices are higher while the output will be decreasing, meaning the economy produces less, unemployment increases, okay, because the unemployment will be more because the firms are not going to be able to afford to hire the same amount of people as before. When the price level of the prices are higher, the wages are going to be higher, and besides, when the level of the prices are higher, people are not going to be able to buy more goods and services, and there will be fewer buyers, and when there is no one buying my products, I will decide to produce less. So the production will go down and the level of the prices will go up as a result of a shift in the short-run aggregate supply to the left. You see that here two interesting thing happens. The production goes down. This is the recession part. And on the other side, the prices go up. This is the inflation. So this inflation and stagnation together happening at the same time. So stagnation, where the Y is decreasing, and inflation, where the price is increasing. These two together are known as stagflation. Okay, this situation is known as stagflation, a combination of stagnant economic growth and inflation, which is particularly challenging for policymakers. We're going to look at the reasons behind that, but some policies that effect on why they are going to worsen the situation for the prices. If the policymakers focus on the prices, it is going to worsen the situation for the output. Okay, but let's look at what happens in the long run. Okay, if policymakers choose to do nothing, if just policymakers do not intervene in this economy, uh, so higher unemployment puts downward pressure on wages, causing wages to fall over the time. Okay, this will lower the wages, reduce the lower wages will reduce the production costs, and it will allow the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift back from point A to point B to the right, to the initial place. Okay, so the economy automatically will self-correct, will get back to the initial level. Okay, it will shift back to the right, restoring the economy to its long-run equilibrium at point A. So in the long run, the output returns to its natural rate. In the short run, we had this stagnant economy, a drop in the output, an increase in the level of the prices. But in the long run, it has time to adjust to these changes. Okay, like replacing new energy instead of oil, or new methods of production, replacing the usage of the um, oil in this economy, and the short-run aggregate supply will shift back in the long run to the initial point. Alternatively, policymakers can intervene using the fiscal or monetary policy. They can be used to increase the aggregate demand and accommodate the short-run aggregate supply. This will bring the output back to the natural rate of output. Okay, if the government intervenes and shifts the aggregate demand to the right, if government encourages people to spend more and aggregate demand shifts to the right, it will bring back the output to the right, but we will go to a permanently high level of the prices. The cost will go, the cost of the level of the prices will be permanently higher. Let's look at some historical examples and contexts in this regard. So in 1970s, um, there are two examples related to oil shocks. One of them, the first shock, the huge shock, hit in 1973 through 1975. During that 2 years, the real oil prices rose by more than twice, like it doubled during that time period. And this resulted in the shifting the um, short-run aggregate supply to the left. And it increased the um, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, while reducing the real GDP. You see, this is consistent with the results from the model. The real GDP decreased by 0.7%, and it resulted in an increase in the unemployment rate to 3.5 million people. So the economy was working and self-correcting during that time period until the second big shock, the second huge oil shock in 1978 occurred, and real oil prices rose again. We see that was less than the previous one, but still it affected on the economy, and the consumer prices increased by 26%. So here you see that the real GDP is positive, but remember that this is not the annual amount. This is for the whole time period, and still this output, this real GDP, is way below the long run um, production level. So you remember I was drawing this real GDP showing you this long run trend, even if this increased in 1970, 1978, and 1980, although this increased during that time period, but it's still way below the long run um, output. Okay, so these oil shocks illustrate how significant increases in production costs, like the cost of the oil, can disrupt the economy by reducing output and raising prices, creating stagflation. However, these days, the effect of oil shocks have reduced because of the changes in technology, new energy resources, new methods of the production. All of these have change the dependency of the GDP to the oil prices, and so it is not this much effective, this much like any changes in the oil prices is not going to affect this huge amount. However, understanding these shifts in the short-run aggregate supply curve can help us to explain why some events happen, like oil price shocks, similar to oil price shocks, can lead to both inflation and higher unemployment. By examining these dynamics, we can better analyze how economics, how the economies react to the supply side of the disruptions, the supply side shocks, and the role of policy in mitigating their effect. Okay, next we're going to talk about the effect of the um, different monetary policies and fiscal policies and the uh, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Okay.